Gymnosperms were the predominant plant life form after the end of the Carboniferous. So beginning about 300 million years ago, at the end of the Carboniferous, the CO2 concentrations were decreasing. The planet was getting colder. The glaciers were expanding from the polar regions, and gymnosperms arose, became the predominant form, and their predominance lasted about 150 million years, from 300 to 150 million years before present. So if we begin to look at this in the time scale of since when plants landed or invaded land, so plants invaded land about 470 million years ago. And very early on in the Carboniferous, this great coal-forming period, vascular plants emerged. They were lycophytes. They were lycophytes predominantly and ferns. And since that time, the dominant plant forms have all been vascular plants, with the non-vascular plants that were here when plants first invaded land, occupying very limited moist environments. After the emergence of vascular plants, at the end of the Carboniferous here, the lycopods went extinct, and we saw the emergence of seed plants. The first seed plants to reemerge was a group called the gymnosperms, and they dominated for about 150 million years, from 300 to 145 million years before present. Since that time, we've seen the emergence of yet another group called the angiosperms, and today, angiosperms are the most abundant of the plant forms we have. So we need to understand a little bit about why gymnosperms emerged, and then why did angiosperms not only emerge, but become the predominant plant form on Earth. Now, one thing which is very clear with both gymnosperms and angiosperms is that they're very competitive, that they're able, because of the fact that they are seed plants, to invade dry lands, and they attain height because they have a vascular system, and they have lignin to provide rigidity and structure. So if we begin to look around Utah, we can find a large number of conifers in our foothills, from white fir at the lowest elevations, through Ponderosa Pine and Douglas fir in the middle parts of our canyons, to limber pine and Engelmann spruce near the top. Most of the conifers we have in Utah are evergreen, that is, that the needles persist for more than 1 year, but there are larches. This is here shown a picture of a larch in Austria. We find larches in Alaska and Canada, throughout Europe. They are deciduous. So we have both deciduous and evergreen conifer forms. One of the more ancestral species is Anitophyta, and here we have a plant which might sound fairly local. It's the genus Ephedra, and Ephedra is known as Mormon tea. How it got that name, I don't know. Many ephedra plants are the source of the chemical ephedrine. Those tend to be the Asian ephedra species and not those found in North America. You can make a tea out of the needles of ephedra, but it doesn't taste very good. They have reduced scale leaves, so they don't look like the needles that you would typically find on a pine tree. Instead, they have photosynthetic stems. Other conifers, perhaps less common, more found in tropical and semi-tropical regions, include the cycads. Many of the cycads we find in the Florida, Mississippi, southern Texas region are only about 2 to 3 feet tall, but they can grow to 5 to 8 to 10 meters tall in some parts of the world. So again, cycads are conifers. Conifers tend to be relatively long-lived, I'd say in some cases extremely long-lived. In Utah, we have limber pine that is as old as 1,700 years. Ponderosa pine lives about 1,000 years, as do pinyons and junipers. The oldest conifers are the bristlecone pines. The oldest conifer in the United States is found in the Whiten Mountains of eastern California. And there we find bristlecone pine that live more than 5,000 years. The forests of the Wasatch Mountains, and in fact the forests of much of the Rocky Mountains in central parts of the United States, are all dominated by gymnosperms. Perhaps the most relevant and important is the Douglas fir, Pseudosugamensisi, because it is a common timber tree. At the highest elevations, here we'll find Engelmann spruce, so up at the ski resorts, you'll see Engelmann spruce, whereas if you get into the mouth of the canyon, the first conifer you'll see is going to be the white fir. All of these tree species are common throughout campus. The grounds crew has done a great job of planting representative conifers from throughout the United States and around the world across our campus. In fact, there are 13,000 trees that have been planted on our campus. So the transition from the dominant form of the lycopod that we found during the Carboniferous and tree fern is associated with lowland wet habitats. So while tree ferns were common and some of the early gymnosperms such as Glossopterus were common, they were largely limited to very moist habitats. The transition from ferns to gymnosperms is found within Glossopterus. Now, Glossopterus shows a couple of very interesting features. It has a megaphyll. That is, it has a large leaf, and that large leaf has many veins coming off. So a feature of megaphylls is more than a single vein, like you might have in a pine needle, but you actually have multiple veins coming off. Here we see just one main vein coming down the center of the leaf with side veins coming out on either side. Glossopterus was an early gymnosperm. They're all now quite extinct. This particular specimen is part of a fossil collection that I have showing what life was like back in the Devonian. Now, Glossopterus was about a 30-meter tall tree, and it was found in the supercontinent of Gondwana. So this is Gondwana before its breakup, some 300 million years ago. I think in this drawing here, you can begin to make out some of what would be the continents that we have today. This is South America, for instance. This is Africa, and this is Australia. So the distribution of Glossopterus provides very useful information on what used to be the distribution of the continents, because these fossils have been preserved in each of these locations around the world. A large number of other plants have been preserved. Some are still extant, others have gone extinct. These are some of the additional fossils that I have in my collection. We have trees that look like redwoods. We have fossils, we have needles that look like redwoods. We have needles that look like pine trees. Many of the ancestral conifers that emerged 300 million years have persisted through to today. One that was a surprise is the dawn redwood, Metasequoia. Here you see a fossil Metasequoia. This is about 45 to 50 million years old. This is a fossil found in the Eocene beds of the Green River in southwestern Colorado, western Colorado, southwestern Wyoming, and eastern Utah. I found this plant specimen at 8,000 feet in western Colorado. What's interesting is that while dawn redwoods were thought to be extinct, a single location was found where these plants were still alive in 1941. One location persisted where we found dawn redwoods. Here you see the modern form and how similar it is to the fossil form. The dawn redwood is a deciduous conifer, and it is now one of the most widely planted trees that we have in our parks and cities. We have a number of dawn redwoods on campus. Probably the most magnificent of these is directly west of the Crocker Science Center, between the Crocker Science Center and 200 East, or must be University Avenue, 1350 East.